Hello and welcome. I am here to quote a few stories from Frank Edwards' books Strange World and Stranger Than Science. There is a safe, sane, reasonable world, the world most of us live in every day. But there is also another world, a world just as real, but far more mysterious. It is a world of dreams that have shown themselves to be true, of human beings with superhuman powers, of chilling encounters with creatures that can be found in no natural science textbook, and of even more terrifying experiences with beings and objects not of the planet Earth. Mrs. R. Babington of Alexandria, Louisiana, drove into her driveway at about 2:45 p.m. on November 11, 1958, and parked her car. As she started toward the back door of her home, she heard the patter of water striking the lawn and tapping gently on the roof of her home. There was nothing really noteworthy about that, even though the sun was shining and it certainly wasn't raining. She decided it was only some splashover from a sprinkler in the neighbor's lawn. Trouble was that her neighbors were not sprinkling, but the water continued to stream down. Pipe burst, perhaps? Examination revealed that all the piping was in good order, and no hoses or outside faucets were turned on. Now it was becoming interesting. Mrs. J.T. Sumrall, who lived across the street, noticed Mrs. Babington circling the house and came out to see what was wrong too. She, too, could see the drops of water glistening in the clear air as they streamed down from nowhere onto the house. Address Laborde, manager-editor of the Alexandria Daily Town Talk, was summoned to the scene by some of the dozens of persons who had gathered to watch this phenomenon. Laborde observed that the water could not be coming from the leaves of the trees because the trees were leafless at that time. By sighting against a 25-foot-high evergreen in the yard, however, he and the others could see that in the rain was indeed coming from somewhere high above the house, and that it was falling in an area about 100 feet square and nowhere else. For 2.5 hours, the water streamed down, and then, as suddenly as it began, the downpour stopped and the crowds went away in wonder. Neither the nearby England Air Base nor the Weather Bureau could explain how it rained out of a clear sky, nor why it should rain for hours on just one spot of such relatively small size. Again, it was a type of phenomenon that is rare, but not unprecedented. Dawson, Georgia, was the scene of a downpour from a clear sky in the second week of September, 1866. Not a cloud in the sky, but the water streamed down like a spring rain for more than an hour on a spot not more than 25 feet in diameter. 4 times during 1 week in October 1886, rain peppered down for hours on just one house and its surrounding lawn, to the great mystification of the folks in Charleston, South Carolina. Since the sky was cloudless during this precipitation, the Charleston News and Courier found the inevitable expert who, without visiting the scene of the event, pronounced it nothing more than the dribbling of insects in the trees. Reporters who went to see for themselves found the water peppering down, hour after hour, on the trees, around the trees, and on top of the house. They may be pardoned if they concluded that the dribbling came not from the insects, but from the expert. In the New York Sun, under date of October 24, 1886, will be found a brief but interesting account of the strange rain which was plaguing a small area in Chesterfield County, South Carolina. For 14 days the rain fell almost continuously on that one little sector, and it came down with such intensity that the drain pipes were kept gushing to carry it from the roofs. Where it came from, it is not known, for all during that period the skies were cloudless and sunny. Rain on the roof, even from a clear sky, is baffling, but it can be tolerated. However, when it begins to rain inside the house, well, that's a different matter. Dr. and Mrs. William Waterman lived in a nice 8-room house near Windsor, Vermont, when their troubles began in September of 1955. The first inkling they had of the impending time of trial was the discovery one morning that a strange dew or heavy mist was collecting on just about everything in the house. It stood in bright, shiny beads like perspiration on the arms of chairs and on the woodwork. The watermen sought to deal with it by sponging it off, a procedure that left them right where they started, after they carried out 13 buckets of water in the first 2 days. Needless to say, the doctor and his wife were at a loss to understand why such a thing was happening in the house, where they had spent 9 trouble-free years. The doctor reported that one day, as he transferred a shallow dish of grapes from one room to another, it filled with water during the transit. As was to be expected, they sought expert help. Electricians could find nothing wrong with any appliances. The insulation and the plumbing checked out too. In fact, the plaster and the insulation were quite dry. The water pipes were not sweating from contact with the air. There were no leaks and no seepage. Just that inexplicable collection of water on everything in the house, hour after hour. The well-watered watermen moved their clothing and furniture out of the house to dry, and moved themselves into a trailer until the plague of indoor rain finally ceased, and the house became livable once more. Ed Motts saw the cloud that killed his peach trees. He was mowing the terraced lawn of his home at 440 Bowl Street, Cincinnati, Ohio, about 5:30 on the morning of July 22nd, 1955. It was just a pleasant summer morning, and Ed wanted to get that lawn manicured before the sun got too hot for him. There was nothing unusual about his work until he knelt beside a small peach tree to pull up some weeds that the mower could not reach. As he reached out to grab a handful of weeds, a few reddish drops fell on the back of his hand. The substance was warm and sticky. It looked and felt like watery blood, except that it was oily to the touch. A moment later, the stuff was pattering down all around him, thicker in texture and even darker red than blood. It was literally raining, like being caught in a warm shower, as he described it later. Moats backed away and looked up. There were about 1,000 feet overhead was a small cloud unlike anything he had ever seen before. It was a mixture of red and green and pink and seemed to be rolling. The red in the cloud was the color of the stuff that was raining down on his peach tree. In fact, he could see the drops falling from the direction of the cloud, sort of a smoky leg that broke into droplets as high as he could distinguish them. At this point, Mr. Motts noticed that the red stuff on his hands was burning him, as a strong antiseptic in an open cut might do. He ran into the house and washed his hands with soap and warm water, and had no difficulty getting rid of the strange substance. When he went back outside, the cloud was nowhere in sight, and he finished mowing the lawn. Next morning, Mr. Motts discovered episode 2 of his bizarre experience. Every one of his 6 healthy young peach trees had died during the previous 24 hours. The leaves were brown and most of them had fallen off. The fruit, about the size of hen's eggs the day before, was shriveled tightly around the seeds. The tree trunks were shriveled and hard, and the grass around and under the peach trees was dead where the mysterious red rain had fallen on it. There were no planes in the area at the time of the incident, and even had there been, they could not have dropped any liquid into such a restricted pattern, nor does Mr. Motts accept the suggestion that some chemical plant might have discharged a cloud of waste matter that somehow hovered over his peach trees for a few minutes. The bewilderment of Ed Motts was only equaled by that of various experts who came and listened and took samples and left. That group included the United States Air Force, which sent representatives to take up the trees and collect the dead peaches and grass, and above all to question Mr. Motts until he had his fill. They took all he could furnish and gave him nothing in return, not even a hint as to why they were so intensely interested in the strange-looking cloud that killed his peach trees with a stinging red rain.